Hey there, folks. Finley here. This is just a really short video to introduce you to a guy named Tennessee Williams. Why should you know him? Probably because he is the most famous and important of the American playwrights of the 20th century. There's three names to sort of know. They're really famous names, and you watch know them just because they're really famous. Eugene O'Neill, who wrote really depressing plays that were very long. Arthur Miller, who wrote really depressing plays that were very realistic, and then Tennessee Williams, who wrote really depressing plays that were realistic but also sort of dreamlike. Yeah, all very depressing. These are not comedy writers. But of them, Tennessee Williams is in some ways the most famous. And you can sort of look at him as the most famous American playwright. So he's a name that you should know. He was born, again, you don't need to worry about dates, but just to have some context, he was born in 1911. He died in 1983, so he was mostly writing in the middle of the 20th century. And Tennessee is not his real name, of course. He was born Thomas Lanier Williams III. He did not like his family at all. That's a major part of his plays, and he did not like his identity as this poor Southern kid. And so he took on the name Tennessee as his writer's name, Tennessee Williams. When he was 33, he wrote a play that I hope you've heard of because it is, again, one of the most famous plays of all time. It's called The Glass Menagerie. We'll talk a little bit about it. That performed in 1944. So again, middle of the 20th century, World War II type of time. And then he went on from there to write a lot of plays. He wrote so many plays. Many of them were not so great. We'll talk about that. But a lot of plays that were super famous. His next play, A Streetcar Named Desire, maybe the most famous play, that was 47. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof in 1955. Sweetbird of Youth and The Iguana. So they're all sort of right there in the middle of the 20th century. So why is this guy important? To begin with, he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. The Pulitzer Prize is the most important award for creative work out there. The Oscars and the Tonys hold nothing to it. It is for a work of lasting importance to the American canon. He's got 2 of them for Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Streetcar Named Desire. His plays, as I said, they're not happy plays. They deal with human pain, and they deal honestly with human pain. This is, I think, the important thing to keep in mind. Is we encounter human pain in like soap operas, right? And those really bad movies, like The Notebook, right? These horrible movies that have no weight to them. He dealt with human pain and loss and suffering, but in a really compassionate, loving, realistic way. And he was able to balance both that realism of actually, what would the person really say? What would a person really feel without sugarcoating it at all? As well as a non-realistic element. He used reflection and memory and dreams to sort of fade out the edges to it. So he wasn't sort of a pure realist like Arthur Miller or Eugene O'Neill were. He was an impressionist, if you think of painting. He was blurring the edges of things to get at something that was even more true. His major plays have all been made into really famous movies. And again, they're sort of old-fashioned movies now because they were made in the middle of the 20th century. Some of them are black and white, but they're all really, really good and really, really famous, Oscar winners and that kind of thing. Because his plays are so famous, I'm going to give you a short plot synopsis of his 3 most famous plays, just because they are so famous that anyone who does theater or really art of any sort is sort of expected to know them. So the first play, The Glass Menagerie, is really based on his life. It's about man Tom, that was what his family called him, Tom, early 30s, living with his mom, who is poor, and his younger sister, who is in some way disabled. It's not made clear if that's a real disability or if it's mostly in her head. And mom is super overbearing, and came from a rich family and is all so pretentious and so like that Southern pretentious, that sweetheart type of thing, that bless your heart type of pretension, right? And just wants the younger sister to get married so that she'll be taken care of. And Tom, the main character, just wants to get out. He wants to leave his family and actually go and live his life. it is indicated, it's not made clear in the play, but it's indicated that Tom is probably gay because Tennessee Williams was gay. Again, this is the middle of the 20th century. Being out was just not a thing at that time. And so a lot of his plays edge around this idea of characters being gay without ever coming right out and saying it. And he's important in that way, too, for introducing that to the dialogue on stage. Anyway, end of the play, all of the designs for Laura to get married fall through. She has all these little glass animals. That's why it's called the Glass Menagerie. And she sort of puts all of her love and care into them, and one of them gets broken. And it's a metaphor clearly for her own fragile state. And at the end of the play, the main character, Tom, leaves them. He lives his own life and he abandons them. And the play is his sort of looking back on what he did to them by leaving them in order to have his own freedom. So it's very sad. It's very moving. I saw a great production of it with Zachary Quinto on Broadway. It's still done everywhere. It's great. Streetcar Named Desire, maybe even more famous. It's about a woman, again, very pretentious Southerner. Turns out she's quite poor. She has to move in with her sister and her husband after she has a mental breakdown. And she's always sort of putting on airs and acting like she's much more sophisticated than she really is. And the play is about the reality of her poverty and the people that she's with coming and banging into this pretension that she has, this dream she has of being more sophisticated and richer and more, elite than she really is. And again, what's great about these plays is the compassion, the tenderness with which Williams writes this character. We feel badly for her. I mean, she acts in these horrible ways and she acts like she's better than everyone around her. But we see that it comes from this pain and longing she has for somebody else, or for something else. End of the play does not end well at all. She basically gets raped and taken away to an insane asylum. I told you these were not happy plays. And then his other play that you should know, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, married couple, and ostensibly the play is about this sort of, they're all trying to get the wife, who goes by Cat, she's very sexy, Maggie the cat. Everyone's trying to get her dad to write them into the will because he's old and he's super rich and he's probably going to die. So that's the main sort of plot. But the real theme is that Maggie's husband, whose name is Brick, I mean, come on, is again secretly gay. And so that leads to this tension in their relationship. And he's very, very subtle in this. He never comes right out and says it. But there's that tension underneath there. So anyway, those plays of his are so famous. Everyone knows them. So I just wanted you to have some sense about, like, what are these plays? Later in life, he had a miserable life, miserable childhood, awful family. Super successful playwright, middle of his life, but then at the end of his life, he was an enormous alcoholic, also gay at a time where that was really not an easy thing to be, and he wanted to experiment more with his plays, and so his later plays were a much more experimental style, leaning more heavily into that dreamlike, impressionistic style, and audiences hated them. Enormous flops. He wrote so many plays. And his most famous plays, like I mentioned, are maybe the most famous plays ever written by an American. They're still produced all the time. Glass Menagerie is constantly being produced. Super famous film versions of them. But the plays that he wrote from about 1965 until his death in 1983, and he was writing right up to the time he died, were all huge flops, and were not regarded well at all. And he, alcoholic, died. He choked on the cap to a bottle of eye drops, probably because he was trying to put the eye drops in, and he was super drunk and he choked on it. And so really, really sad life, really, really sad plays, but maybe the most famous American playwright. Certainly somebody that you ought to know because so many other pieces either reference his work or reference his personality or were inspired by what he did. So yeah, that's Tennessee Williams.